Hey, welcome back to the Rack and Focus podcast. I'm Josiah Blizzard.
And I'm John Doyle, and we're here at the AMC Theater in Plymouth Meeting in Pennsylvania to see MIDSOMMAR.
I just became a Stubbs member, it's pretty much MoviePass, except they shouldn't go under and go bankrupt like MoviePass did because they own the theater, and the movies. So it's a little bit better than MoviePass. You pay, I think, $20 a month, rounded down a little bit. I think it's like 23. And you see 3 movies a week.
So that's going to give us the opportunity to see more movies. I'm going to be joining up as soon as I get back from a trip I'm taking in a little bit. We got lots going on. We are here during the day in broad, devastating daylight.
So bright.
Because we're seeing MIDSOMMAR, which is a horror movie set in full bright daylight.
You've heard some pretty disturbing things about this movie. I've read nothing. We both might come out completely shocked and disturbed and not want to talk about this at all. So I'm excited to see it. Are you?
Yes, I've brought a bucket to vomit in if I need to afterwards, and some anxiety medicine.
Awesome. Well, let's go see it.
Let's go check it out.
You're listening to the Racking Focus podcast.
I hope this thing doesn't shift right here.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I'll bend my body a little bit.
Yeah, we going somewhere?
It's funny. What's that?
You putting your seatbelt on?
Look, the car's running. I'm putting my seatbelt on. It's been a long trip.
Are you preparing for a dangerous talk?
Indeed. All right. Well, we're back after the movie. It's the middle of the day.
It is MIDSOMMAR currently, and the air's on. So if you hear a little hum, that's what it is. Spoilers as well. We just saw MIDSOMMAR. We're going to be talking about all the spoilers within MIDSOMMAR. Although I don't even really know where to start, other than asking the question, why does a movie like this get made?
So I'm not sure what you're asking me. Can you ask that question again?
What is the purpose for a film like this?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and one maybe we'll find some closer answer to as we move through the conversation. I mean, it's a movie designed to disturb, right?
I'm disturbed.
I mean, it's a movie designed to create a sense of madness to some great extent. Like you're experiencing a real disturbed sense. I mean, there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
But I think that's a lot of it. It's not anything like a traditional horror film, right?
No, nothing.
It uses some tropes.
There are definitely tropes.
But it encapsulates them in a very different structure. This isn't a solo movie. There are other movies like this in the world.
Right.
So like Wicker Man, although less so, is very similar to this. I mean, the original, not the remake, which is
I haven't seen either.
There was a terrible 70s movie called The Devil's Reign with Ernest Borgnine and William Shatner that fits into the same sort of genre as opposed to, and there's a lot of 70s movies actually, which this is strangely reminiscent of a lot of that that fit into that same category. So there you go. That's some frame of reference. I think Ari Aster has a goal, and this is not from reading or listening to that, because I've heard other conversations as opposed to what Aster said. It seems like it's about pushing limits of what you can do with film to use a genre to talk about an issue.
What's the issue?
So I think it's grief. Mm-hmm. I've heard a ton of reviewers, and in fact I think Aster say it's about a failing relationship. And it's about how it's like a metaphor for a relationship falling apart.
That definitely comes through, for sure. Grief comes through a lot.
Grief comes through
as
very
well.
clearly for me.
There was I think what the film did for me a little bit was challenge the thoughts you have about a culture, any culture. If something's different, doesn't mean it's wrong. Just means that your perspective is not the same as theirs, right? And I think we all know that going into a different culture, experiencing something completely different than we're used to. But there are moments within this commune, things that they're doing that I'm like, that is actually a really interesting, maybe coping mechanism or something along those lines, right? Like I was very caught off guard, but also moved at the when they're wailing with her in her grief. They made her they made her moaning and her yelling and her screaming, what was once only her doing it, made her feel secluded and left out. They made that feeling that she was feeling feel normal and inclusive, which I thought was just really, it was just so many weird moments like that. That I was like, that's a really interesting thing that they're doing. That could potentially, I'm not a psychologist, I don't know how the mind works, but stuff that could potentially help people in real life cope with whatever they're dealing with, you know?
So a lot of those moments reminded me of acting exercises I did in grad school and with other actors. And,
right.
and, you know, one of the things I slammed the original Blair Witch Project for is that it looks like a pile of kids in acting class just vomiting out emotion. And here, because of craft, that isn't what happened, but it was very much these raw emotional states, which I think is why it's disturbing. It's interesting because I'm not sure it creates pathos in the audience.
Right.
I think it creates this discomfort, which is different than, to some extent, what you might think this movie might be trying to do.
Right, well, we don't like to be vulnerable in our society, right? We don't like to, even eye contact for an extended period of time, which they brought up in the film for a little bit, is something that is just, it's difficult to do. Like, I don't look at you the entire time like this while we talk, because then you just looked away, because it's weird. It's weird to just look at someone else's eyes while you're talking to them for an extended period of time. Yeah, so I guess the vulnerability that they showed would definitely make you feel discomfort, right? And I certainly felt that. I felt more discomfort because of the graphic images. I didn't expect how graphic it was to actually happen. And it didn't happen all that much, but when it did, it was jarring.
So I think one of the strengths of this film is obviously imagery, right? Like, it's from the opening, right? Which much of the film is told to us in that opening panel. I mean, all I want to do is go freeze frame that thing and just walk through it. So much of it's told in that opening panel, but there's image after image that is startling. And I mean startling both in their compositional beauty, and then at times in the scale of violence, and not necessarily realistic, right?
Right.
Like, the bear to me didn't look realistic.
Yeah. You know what this felt like? It felt very, like, I want to say Brothers Grimm's storybook.
Okay.
Horror. Oh, like, I feel like it could have been. This feels like this could have been like the original work for something that Disney then takes and turns into a nice children's film.
Well, undoubtedly there will be a MIDSOMMAR Disney version where it'll all be happy and animated, and then they'll make it live action after.
Right. And it will flop because it lacks emotion.
Right.
Yeah, so what stood out to you guys? I'm looking at these guys walking by.
I know, there's a group of people walking, checking us out.
What was like, you had to cover your eyes? What was that moment for you where you were like, I had to look away?
So strangely enough, I was terrified of coming to see this film. I'm a highly empathetic individual, and horror movies do a thing to me which Us and this did not. So there wasn't really a moment. I was prepared to turn away when the hammer fell the first time.
Okay. Yeah.
And I was very concerned about the outcome of the book photography. And I'm dancing around spoilers, and I don't know why, but I mean,
the book photography. Wait, okay, just spoil it.
When he was taking photos of the scripture.
Yeah.
What was going to happen there? You know, but surprisingly, I was much less bothered. I anticipate this is the stuff of nightmares for me, as opposed to in the moment.
Right.
In the same way that when I went to Us, I expected to be turning my head constantly, and I didn't at all.
Yeah.
How about you?
Us, I didn't turn my head in any way whatsoever.
So here,
this, they jumped off the rock.
Right.
And that first head smash, I was like, oh, okay.
Right. This is a completely different thing.
This. Okay, that's what this is going to be. And I forgot about the mallet, man. I forgot about the mallet until the guy broke his legs and they started walking up to him with the mallet. I turned away I think at the second mallet
The
smash.
second strike,
because
right.
the first smash was enough for me.
Right.
And then they smashed him 3 more times.
Right. And there's something about the communal nature of the act. So the movie is, I mean, of the things it's really strong, because it's strong in a lot of ways. World building.
Oh yeah.
I mean, this is a complete world.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's not a place.
It's almost like they went into a completely different dimension, and it absolutely.
And there's the runes and details. There's a lot of work to be done by some scholar that's not me. Well, I mean, maybe it's me someday, but it's probably not. Of the runes matching characters, she's wearing runes that we saw multiple times during the piece, and to track that through, and I'm sure there's probably some YouTube video that tracks some of that stuff. And we certainly got all sorts of information in graphic form before we saw
there was a lot of foreshadowing with the entire love potion or love that whole thing between Christian and Maya, I think her name was. They showed in the panels that were hanging on the drying line, the clothesline,
and literally showed them
exactly what was happening. And I forgot about those panels until when was it? It was
pre or post pubic hair?
It might have been post pubic hair.
Okay, because pubic hair.
Strange thing to say in the podcast.
It is. I was going to say to you when we started, I'm not sure if it's going to end up being explicit or not.
I was wondering if it was going to be the pubic hair. It might have been.
The pubic hair was clear to me. I mean, I sort of saw where we were going, but then the pubic hair.
Yeah.
And then there was a lot of very specific graphic imagery that I'm not sure I'm going to say yet. So I'll hold off on that thing.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, that whole thing for him, for Christian, came for me felt very full arc for him. You hear in the beginning they mention that Danny doesn't like to have sex with him, and so he's clearly searching. Like, that was something he never even mentioned. He didn't bring up himself. His friends spoke the truth of who he is, and he kind of followed along that path of what they said, who they said he was. And so he came to this place not necessarily looking for sex, but at the same time, if it was offered,
well, I think if she hadn't come, he was looking for sex.
Absolutely. Yeah. So if he didn't have sex with Maya, would he have been burned in a bear suit at the end of the movie?
And I'm going to say no.
Probably not, right?
Because that's the revenge, but it's also the arc the story needs to tell. So the metaphor is about what this guy is doing, and he is unfaithful to her.
Right.
At the beginning, from the beginning of the film, he's unfaithful.
Right.
And so the arc of her being able to, it's that moment in the opening scene that I think is really interesting. They're having a conversation when they're together after they found out about the trip, and he says sorry, and she says, that sounds like you're just saying too bad. And then by the end of that scene, they've rotated positions, right, physically and blocking, and she's apologizing. And at that moment, I'm like, this is an abusive guy, and he's manipulating her, and she is seriously damaged, and he's awful. And so that comeuppance for him is a metaphor for that relationship where the tables have turned. She has called him accountable. She's become a force of nature in a way, you know, and she calls him out, and that to me was interesting. So I think you're right about him.
Yeah, she has all the power in the end, right?
Right.
Because she's the May Queen. So. And
she is free of her grief when she exercises that.
The smile at the end releases her from everything that she's felt with him, and the smile only comes after she watches the people screaming, and then watches the house burn and fall, and it's after the fall of the house that she gives that smile, and I wasn't sure what emotion she was going to give at the end, but that felt, again, so disturbing, but also right for her character, right?
Her face is a wonder. As an actress, her ability to restrain and convey emotion both was really amazing, I thought. And Aster's use of the camera to help us see that. There's some amazing close-ups.
Amazing. Just amazing. The entire opening call, cell phone call with Is she talking to Christian on the phone?
Well, she talks to Christian and she talks to someone else.
She's talking to someone else on the
unnamed
phone.
female.
And there's this close-up of her in the beginning, and she's crying while she's talking on the phone. It just holds on her. The camera's not even moving. I don't think it's just...
No, it just sits.
It is just...
sits.
I was like, she is incredible. She's an incredible actress.
No, that sequence in that first phone where she ends up by the end of it sort of in this desperate nature is unbelievable.
Yeah.
And then we see that again when she's mourning the experience of the betrayal. And, you know, that look in the keyhole, which reminds me of this... this artwork that's down in the Philly by Marcel Duchamp, where you look through a keyhole and you see a body laid out that could either have been raped or it may have been finished with sex. It may just be laying naked, and you look through spoilers for Duchamp's work. You look through this keyhole and you're forced to be the voyeur, and that moment reminded me so much of that. And then from there, you know, she vomits, right? Like the first person to do that, right? Did someone vomit after the?
I think Christian might have vomited after he at least made the old folks the noise of vomiting. I didn't see anything come out of his mouth, but after they jumped off the cliff, there was definitely some kind of vomit. And
it's like there's some purging that happens for her, and then that amazing scene of grief, shared pain.
Yeah.
So shots that stuck out for you. Let's talk about that, because there's a lot. Or blocking. Let's just say those two structural things.
There's so much. The entire set, everything that was laid out. I mean, I could see him. I could see Ari just kind of like, you have this bird's eye view blueprint of multiple. Like, he just has a ton of different, like, this is scene 1, scene 2, scene 3, and he just goes throughout the commune. It's like, big table here, this is what it looks like, blocking here. Like, the amount of direction I think that must have gone into just everybody's movements, everybody's breath, and how they're saying certain words, and how they're dancing around, and what they're... I don't know how he even shot this movie. It's so much. It looks like so much work. I think wouldn't feel cohesive in the end, because you miss up somewhere, right? Something's not cohesive at some point, and it starts to fall apart and crumble on you. But everything felt so like cohesive throughout. I don't know if he, instead of giving them a certain like direction, they just get, or a certain like, this is what you're gonna do, right? A breath, like if they just let them do what felt right, almost like an improv thing, right? And you mentioned in the beginning that this felt very...
There's a lot of actor kind of work,
yeah. I would imagine that was the case, and they just let them go and probably be. I would be interested to find out more on that. I don't know if that exists.
Yeah, and I would imagine that somewhere. Once you start shooting for real, you have to lock some of that down.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, when you're talking about like the blueprint of the space, that moment where they're walking into the commune and we do that sort of shot up from above and we're watching the pattern and we can see the different color clothing, the white and the non-white clothing moving through this forest into the space. And I said this about The Dead Don't Die. We had geography from go.
Right.
I knew where everything was. The only thing I'm not sure where it was in a way in my head is that cliff. That to me was out of the general structure of the space we were in. Not saying it's what's a problem, it just was, but all the other pieces are there. They form a shape. The tables formed very clear shapes, runes, like they were runes, I think.
They were the rune things,
like and then that blocking of the chain activity of the leader starts and down the table goes the forks and spoons and all of that sound work. I mean, spectacular.
My goodness, the sound was amazing.
The sound was amazing.
This is something you're not going to get at home, because there was a time. The biggest moment it stuck out to me, the sound, was when they're dancing, and she's spinning around, and you can feel the sound rotate around your head in the theater, and then it hard cuts to Christian, and it's at the screen, and then it cuts back in, and it's again like it was just incredible. And pulsating, like there was these all of the music, all of the not just the score, but the physical music in the film that the people, the actors are playing, was just pulsating in your brain, it felt like, throughout those moments. I want to go back to a shot real quick.
Good, do it.
I think one of the craziest shots, the coolest shots, was the drive into the space,
good.
right? Starts on top, it starts behind the car, and I think it goes up to the top of the car, and then it rotates in front of the car,
so
and it's now
sort of
upside down. And you track with that for a minute, and then it switches, and now it's upside down, their perspective,
right?
And then it rotates up
back
again.
Around, yeah.
And man, like, if that wasn't just the camera telling you, hey man, this is not going to be good.
Right,
we're going into an upside down, Stranger Things type of this. Everything is going to be really weird, and it's get ready.
When you think about the hero's journey, there's this moment when we leave the real world, when we enter this sort of magical world in the hero's journey, and for sure, like, there's a symbol, and I think you could probably track the hero's journey straight through for Danny. I think you could walk that storyline in a twisted way, but I think you could do it. Not that I think we should, but that moment to me felt like that. And certainly you can't, in the middle of July, owning Netflix, not say, oh, we're upside down, Stranger Things, for at least one moment.
Right, you have to. The other thing that I thought was just absolutely incredible was the color palette of the film. The tones, the color grade, the choices for what color clothing and flowers and buildings and just everything. Every little bit of color that was in this film was so carefully thought out. It almost like felt very Wes Anderson pastel-y to me, without the kind of weird vibes of Wes. But yeah, I loved that, and how hard it is to shoot at noon, or like 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon. I mean, right now it is almost 6 o'clock here in Pennsylvania, and it's almost getting to be the time of like perfect shooting conditions. But they were shooting high noon, sun. You're gonna get those raccoon eyes, like dark circles. The lighting was just spectacular throughout, and it helped that they were all wearing white, probably to bounce all of this light back onto people's faces. But such a deception for everyone to wear white and to be in this, almost carefree feeling space, and then all of a sudden you're flipped upside down.
Well, and you flip that to the beginning where we're in that winter sequence, which feels like such a cheat, right? Like you're in there and you're like, what the hell's going on at the very beginning? And I haven't heard anyone talk about this. So the use of negative space in that opening sequence, all those shots with all of that empty space above, was spectacular, really beautiful. And the credits rolling through the storm and the trees and this, the deadness of winter. And of course we get death in that moment, in what another astounding image of her sister's suicide. Again, spoilers. The deaths in that are terrible, but we sort of know part of what's going on there. But the sister's suicide moment is so violently graphic and disturbing.
I want to know, how does that play into her journey later, other than her being very mentally susceptible to everything that she experienced, right? Even the mention of the word family sends her into a sickness, right? A sickening, I need to use the bathroom and get away from everybody for a minute.
Well, because that grief sticks with you, right? Like it eats away at your inside when you don't have a way to deal with it. And she had no comfort, right? And she was restraining everything, and she's so unhealthy,
right?
And so, and for me, that path through grief really is what the story for me is. And
I would say that's right.
Really
I would say that feels right.
And
the moment of death in general, most of the time being so sudden and shocking to her. She had no idea that her entire family was going to be, was dead while she was trying to get a hold of them, right? But here in MIDSOMMAR, in this Swedish commune, Swedish? Norway? Where are they? Sweden. Where's Stockholm?
Sweden.
Stockholm's in Sweden.
I'll look it up.
Every death that happened there, other than her friends, was planned and purposeful and thought out, and this is when people are going to die because they're going to sacrifice. There's no danger here. There's no sudden loss of life here. Everything is given. Death is a choice rather than something that just happens.
Yeah, talk about, and we're going to run out of time, so I think we're going to end up pausing and restarting. So why don't we do that?
Yeah, let's just
why don't we just do it? So we're going to pause, and we'll be right back. There'll be a sound effect or something, and we'll be back.
You're listening to the Racking Focus podcast.
All right, we're back. Sam, sorry I didn't count down for you, but that's okay. So yeah, there's man, where do you want to go next? Like that, there's just so much to talk about. But
so I'm going to talk about
it all.
Right, some of the tropey loss of individual characters and how well that was crafted in a way that we knew what it meant. So as a film audience, we're able to digest that the slasher of this movie is the commune.
Right, it's the village. Right.
It's the village itself. But all along the way, we're seeing some very graphic images associated with that. I think the foot with rune on it, I think the skin face, and the very strong potential that they had a meal of the jester. I thought that was spectacular. That the goofy guy, the guy who pees on the tree, is the jester at the end. But I mean, I think it's very likely he was dinner in the pie.
Oh, someone was eating.
The
pie was made before they took him away, right?
No.
Or the pie was, because he brings up. Is that a pubic hair? Yeah.
So that's right. So that's
so he gets taken away during the pie.
Right. So it's the other dude. Maybe.
I was thinking that the black guy, Josh, I think, was part of the tea or the stew or something.
Okay, right.
But I have no idea. That's what they make you wonder. Like,
you have to think it through.
There's someone's in some food somewhere.
I think. Well, when we, I think it's the first couple is who's gone at the time of the pie eating. Right. So it might be
and
them.
That guy was kind of flayed open with his lungs still breathing.
Still functioning.
He was still alive.
Yeah.
That might have been one of the most horrific images from the film for me. Was just the discovery
use of flowers and eyes. That's a lot. And he doesn't. Does he actually end up in the? I don't think he ends up.
I don't think
in
he
the
does.
end in the burning
I didn't see
building.
him in the. But there. So what did they say? 4.
It was 4 and 4 and then 1. Right.
And so you had.
That was chosen.
You had. Josh, the black guy, right? Josh, the jester, who was he got the Leatherface treatment. And then you had the girl. And
then it must be the guy.
It must be that guy, right?
Yeah, so he must have moved in there after that. I don't know
when they did that.
Getting lost in all of that isn't as worth it as just the idea that that image is really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, definitely tropes for all of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
You definitely seen, people have seen enough horror films to understand, like, no, you definitely shouldn't get up from the table and go follow her somewhere when she didn't say where they were going. It's just, I'll show you. Don't do it. Yeah. Just don't do it, right? And it was, I didn't pick up on, at first when he came in and distracted Josh from taking the photos of the rune book. I did not pick up at first. I was like, who is that? Like, I didn't realize that's who it was, and that in fact he was just skinned and someone was wearing his face. But also there was like
there was a cod piece thing too. Yeah, for sure.
And so his manhood seemed chopped off,
which matches the act he did against the burned bodies, which is an awful smell. The burning of human flesh is not pleasant. Talk about a difficult thing to have done, to stand there with it, and then for them to have burned essentially all night, right? And the next morning for them to be clear.
Smell, right?
Oof.
But and one of the bigger tropes, the only person I felt who was safe this entire film was the girl, was Danny. Last girl, final girl, trope from all those horror films, right? It's the last girl who's always alive, and the main girl who's...
And she ends up twisting and defeating the evil of the world, which to some great extent ends up being Christian.
Right.
Which is a great name to place in opposition to a pagan society.
Yeah.
I mean, I can just, kudos to character names, right? You know, like that really plays out. So imagery-wise, really spectacular, music-wise spectacular. A lot of these sort of tropes redefined and twisted for us. How about the issue of the deliberately created, distorted being, whatever you want to call them, the deformed person? That felt to me like the only thing that I didn't...
inbred child.
Yeah, and I didn't get that. I didn't get an output for that, save for the fact that at this point the book is just distortion, right? It's what's in their book is meaningless. But I'm not sure I understood that particular character.
Yeah, it seems like I'm not really sure either, but it seems like they need some guide, like they have some god, or they have there's some higher power somewhere, and the higher power may just be the earth or the universe or whatever, right? Speaking to an unclouded child or an unclouded young adult who doesn't have to deal with the stress of, I don't know what they're stressed about in this commune.
Well,
they don't
language,
taxes,
if nothing else, right?
Right. He just doesn't speak. So yeah, I'm not sure what the purpose of that was, other than giving the runes a origination like place.
And it certainly is a red herring for who's the bad guy, quote unquote, right? You know, the Leatherface moment of that distorted face underneath a skin mask coming in is yet another like completely twisted trope that's really spectacular.
Well, and we have the only actually horrific looking thing on screen being an innocent being.
Yeah, that's a good point too.
And so that may be what it is, of just like what you're looking at here isn't the bad thing. Actually, this thing that looks like it could be a villain in another film somewhere actually is completely innocent, doesn't do any harm the entire film, other than watching the horrors take place from his bedroom corner as they continue to
painting scripture for all practical purposes.
Right.
What do you think about special effects and drugs?
It was trippy, man. That was I don't know how they did it, what they did specifically to make like kind of the earth and the mountains move. Loved the flower kind of with this heartbeat on her.
Goodness gracious!
On her head, it was amazing. And it wasn't overdone. I didn't feel like I was like, this is too much. I'm getting a little dizzy.
Well, there's things on the table that are both like exhaling and inhaling and moving, and there is this like distortion wave through lots of our images. And what was interesting to me is it's that question of POV versus not POV. So I'm not sure any of those shots were POV shots. You follow me? But we were seeing perspective.
They weren't. I don't think they were POV, but I think we suddenly jumped into Danny's perspective, right? At least from the like almost like an out of body experience from Danny being the
when camera. She looked at her feet, when she looked at her hand, with the growth of
the grass coming through,
right?
Yeah.
Those were moments that were POV, but a lot of the rest of it is us seeing from opposite angles. She's in the shot,
and I think partially. Aster wanted us to feel like we were there with them, because I never want to look away from a movie, like ever. Like I just don't do it, because I'm like, oh, it's gonna be fine. Like there's special effects, it's okay, whatever. I'm like, I'm not gonna look at this guy's head getting smashed in 2 more times. Like I've seen it once, I'm not gonna look again. I'm gonna turn away. Which all of the other characters that are new to this commune are doing. And later on, I don't think I looked away since then. That was the only time I really turned my eyes. But the drug hippie effect, right, starts to become more and more apparent as the film goes on. I think towards the end, like there's just things that are just
there's just a presence.
There's just stuff that's moving, and so we've drank the tea and we've eaten the food, and we are now a part of this commune, whether we like it or not.
And there are some moments where camera's tracking away, where actors are moving or characters are moving away from us, and a character will turn around to draw us in or make contact with us.
Yeah.
It's not directly in camera, but it's pretty close to in camera, and that's really
who I felt
about us.
You know who I felt
connected.
like? I felt like Christian at the end after he's been drugged a little bit, and he's just, you can't speak, you can't move, all you can do is see. My eyes were opened, and I'm just stuck there paralyzed watching everything happen around me, almost like the kid in the bed in the corner. That's how I feel now looking back on it.
Yeah, and as we're sitting in the fire at the end, we've sat through a fire the whole time through, especially if you're open to that. I hardly ever like hearing other people talk in the theater, but the couple to our front right, and she hated it.
She was dreaming.
And she hated it.
Yeah,
at the
she
end.
hated the film.
You left a few moments before me. I was watching a little more of the credit design, and she's like, "That was awful, almost awful." But she needed a lot of instruction. That was interesting to me, and certainly a salvation from the stress. But I do think we were in that space as an audience, and that's a powerful thing for a director to be able to do.
There was times where something happened and it was humorous, right? I would chuckle at first, and then it would suddenly take a hard nosedive. Like, no, this is serious, man. Like, don't laugh at this.
The sex scene is horrible and ridiculous and funny. And then she's obviously a virgin. There's blood on his penis when he's leaving out. That was the thing I was going to say before I had to say it. That level of detail is it's about the things we are uncomfortable about our nature and our relationship. It's about the consequences of sexuality and all those things that we struggle with, like, as people. And I think one of the dangers of a film like this is that we live in a society that has less empathy, and I don't know what an audience full understanding of this is. It's like people who watch The Handmaid's Tale and quote the bad guys lingo it's they quote that scripture from that world. Blessed be the fruit, and you're like, oh, don't say that to your girlfriend. So a lot of ways I worry about people's response to this. But we saw it in a theater during the day a week after it's open. We didn't see it in that big community.
I wonder what the overall response was from people who did see it. So if you've seen the movie, please tweet at us, reach out to us. We'd love to know your thoughts on the film.
I have friends who have written some extraordinary things about their experience of this, and it lives up to certainly the quality of filmmaking. So let's take that moment. So we're running out of time, or we're going to run out of time, and we do want to get this podcast to you so you can have something to think about. So how do you rate this?
I don't know how to rate this. I don't know how to rate the film, because this is not a film I am ever gonna want to see again in my life. I just don't have a need to see it. As spectacular as the filmmaking is behind it, horror I don't necessarily watch more than once or twice, unless it's like a classic, like Halloween sort of thing, right? As far as like a horror film goes, it's almost like I don't want to watch Saw ever again. Like Saw, the first Saw is good. The second Saw, third Saw, and beyond, they just get gore for gore's sake.
Right.
This kind of teetered that line a little bit, right? There was meaning behind all of the gore, and so for that, it's not just like a low number for me, but I would probably put it at like an 8 for a horror film, because I was genuinely disturbed by the imagery, but also by the story of what was happening. Filmmaking wise, like, it's astounding. Like 9.5 out of 10, like 10 out of 10, like it can't be less than that, because every single piece of detail, everything they did was so spectacularly crafted that it deserves it. It just, and the acting was amazing, like everything.
Yeah, it's the kind of horror film that needs to be up for an Oscar, right? It's never going to get up for Best Picture. I can't imagine the Academy would have the guts to do some of that, but in the categories of production design and direction and all of these areas
across the board,
you know that these people are working at the top of their game, because we would have seen the failures and the movie's disturbing nature doesn't work if we can find fault, right?
Right.
So if I can find the piece that slips, if I can say, oh wait, that's not the same color shoes, or you know, why did why did you do this, or why did you do that? I'm not saying that. I'm saying, look how well crafted, look how well designed it is, look how much work went into this piece, and it's as you say, it's across the board. So I mean, I would rate the filmmaking of this a 9 or a 10. Like it is really breathtaking. And not just because guy's face gets smashed, but because the filmmaking is breathtaking.
It really is.
For me, that's how I survive. So I'm much more likely to be disturbed by a horror film that's made less effectively, because the craft of the film keeps drawing me in as an audience person, even though I'm not saying like, oh, let me slice this apart. It's just craft is worthy of a measure of respect and connection that you don't do when a movie's not as good, and then you're sucked into something that really creeps you out, so that's what I would say. I'd rate it really high. As a horror film, I don't think it falls into a traditional horror film category. It is living in the world of this cult cinema. It's much closer to something like The Hills Have Eyes or something like that than it is to a traditional slasher film, a post 80s film. It's a really good horror film. It's but again, rating it in that way seems weird, which is what we normally try to do, right?
It's hard.
This is just a really great, well-made film. I'm glad we saw it. I'm actually super excited we saw it during the day. Because walking out of the theater into daylight is a really exciting, emotional experience.
Even after seeing this film, specifically after seeing this film, not all danger and destruction and evil happens in the night, right? So
that idea of the dark man and the we're going to defeat the dark man. There's so much language that is traditionally placed into religion, and they just take it and play with it.
Right. Does evil often masquerade itself as light, right? So
there we sit in this bright world. And Aster says he's not doing any more horror films. That's the thing
interesting.
For you to know.
I had not seen Hereditary. What other film did he do?
You can look that up.
I'm going to look up Aster.
So Hereditary is terrifying, but Hereditary is it's not a non-traditional horror film in a lot of ways, but it's much closer to something we would recognize, right?
Right.
So that's we're surprised by what the story does, but we're not surprised by the general structure. But here again, he's using these tropes, and that's one thing I haven't heard at all in the reviews, and maybe I haven't listened to the right reviews, but in my searching around in this interim time, warming myself up to be willing to come see this, I've heard reviews and nothing said, oh, it's sort of traditional tropes all present. He just does with them what a great filmmaker does, which is make them new. Right. We're not,
puts his own twist on them.
And makes them something that we both can recognize, but we're not dismissed because of our access to them. This movie follows the rules of Scream. But it does, but we don't sit in it seeing those rules be followed, and that's just really tremendous craft.
It's just Hereditary and MIDSOMMAR that have really been his big. I mean, everything else I think he's done has been very, very indie, under the radar, nothing I've heard of. So
we just need to know that there's going to be other films by this guy, and they're not going to be horror films. And I'm anxious to see how that goes. But in the same way, we know that Jordan Peele is not going to sit in horror for the rest of his career. There are people who give up. Horror is a great entry point to making great films. I mean, look at Jaws. Jaws is spectacular, and that is the doorway for Spielberg, right?
It gives you the kickstart, right? To kind of, and oftentimes horror is cheap to make. Oftentimes it's very cheap to make because a lot of it is spectacle over story, right? But you get Us and you get MIDSOMMAR. I don't know what the budgets were on those films, but you're not just getting these cheap tricks and practical effects and special effects and jump scares that are tricking you into thinking this is an actually really good scary film. You're getting actual horror from amazing directors who are great at the craft of filmmaking and not just giving you a jump scare every now and then, right?
So you recommend it?
I would recommend seeing this film, but just be cautious of the imagery going in. It's definitely something you need to be in the right headspace to watch before seeing it.
Yeah, and I would recommend it as well, but I would recommend the theater viewing.
Yeah.
I think that for the sound alone, for the sound mixing alone, seeing it in a theater where you can get the kind of professional sound, it makes a huge difference.
For sure.
And so that's just a recommendation. Who knows if people will do that. I think it's going to suffer on the small screen.
Yeah.
I think it gets safer when it's put in the small box. We need to be overwhelmed.
Right. Even putting headphones in would be better than just listening to it on your TV. So if you're going to watch it, maybe watch it alone by yourself with some headphones in or something. Other than that, what's our next film? Do we know?
No, we don't. We may go find ourselves a small indie film, but you, at the end of the month, in just 2 weeks, really, people will be hearing you, not me. I'll be in Italy talking about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yeah, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Quentin Tarantino's 9th film. And I'm probably going to bring Alec on and chat in the car with him about the film. He's a Tarantino fan. Then we'll loop you in for the second half of the,
I'll come
podcast.
For the second half, and I'll be back in time for that. And if not, I will just do an extra and I'll vomit some things out. And that'll how I'll get rid of my grief from having not seen it.
Cool. Anything else?
Yes, we got to just tell people how to get in touch with us.
Oh, yes. rackingfocuspod@gmail.com. Email us with your films. We would love to know if you're a filmmaker, if you make short films, please, we would love to review your short film. That would be so much fun for us to do. So send that to us at rackingfocuspod@gmail.com and we can kind of work out those details. Other than that, you can find us on Twitter where?
Pod Focus. So you can find us at Pod Focus on Twitter. You can communicate there. We also have a Facebook page we hardly ever touch, but it's there because it's important to do. And we have an Instagram that's Racking Focus Podcast. So you can check us out in any of those places, and we hope that you'll communicate so we can build the rest of our conversation more than just two guys sitting in a car.
Yes, and lastly, please leave us a 5-star review on iTunes or wherever you're listening to your podcasts. If you hate us, leave us a 5-star review. Just write how much you hate us in the comments. If you love us, leave that 5-star review also, and just tell us how much you enjoy listening to this podcast and maybe what we can do better to maybe loop you into the conversation. Other than that,
yeah, we're getting a little better at this, and as a result, I want people to hear it. So I'm super excited now for people to be able to listen, and that requires some reviews. So other than that, what do you want to say?
Man, I'm disturbed. I'm not going to sleep tonight.
All right. Well, I'm going to sleep tonight and wake up in the middle of the night. There's no alcohol tonight, though, for sure.
No,
the world will start bubbling around. So thanks for watching Josiah's Disturbed. We hope you'll be listening to us next time. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Racking Focus Podcast.